Hello, lovely beings. I'm JJ Rose. I wanted to do an episode today on lightworkers and what exactly that means. I've had several of you ask me this, and usually the answer that I give is fairly simple, which is a lightworker is someone who works with the light. And again, my answer comes because I just come from a level playing field of thinking everyone knows what this is, and therefore everyone knows the same information. But I've had the question enough, and I decided to kind of do a bit of a deep dive on it to explain a bit about light workers, to explain about what it is to do light work, and some of the things that go with that. Because I think there is a misconception at times that with light workers, everything is love and light and it's kindness and it's so beautiful, but there isn't always a lot of talk about what light workers go through in order to become light workers and the process of honing oneself with all of the shadow work and all of the things in order to really shine bright. So, yes, a light worker works with the light, obviously. Usually the work is to help lift up others, to help conquer fear, which is what my channel is all about, and really to help bring out things that have been in the darkness into the light so people can work on them. And part of doing that doesn't always make you the most fun at a party, because sometimes you have to call people out on things that they would rather not talk about. These are the elephants in the room. These are the family parties where everyone kind of, just edges around this one particular issue instead of just putting it on the table and talking about it and dealing with it. And everyone having their say in what exactly is going on or what happened and how it's affecting other people. It's also about transmuting the darkness to the light, meaning sometimes having those conversations with people where they're in a very dark time or they're in grief, depression, anger, sadness, trauma, and helping them deal with those dark times and helping them understand why all of that happened so that they can see with light and clarity the purpose and the reason for those things occurring. Therefore, again, bringing something that was in the dark to the light and transmuting it. Because think about it, if you've gone through something really awful and traumatic and all you are is carrying that pain, that anger, that sadness, that grief, and you're not dealing with the why it happened and what happened because that occurred to you. How did that change you as a person? How did that change other people? What were the everlasting effects that exponentially went out as a result of that happening? Were you one who took it for the team? Or was it an example to other people that may have helped multiple others, that you're sitting there in your sadness because it happened to you, but you're not seeing the ever-reaching consequences of that occurring and how beautiful that can actually be in the world. There was this quote, God, this must have been like 30-something years ago, but it was from some book that was coming out, and it said, "From the ugliest depths of concrete jungle blooms a rose." And I thought that was so beautiful because in my mind's eye, I just saw this gritty cityscape, right? With all this concrete and just barren wasteland and this beautiful rose blooming from it. And that's pretty much how people are, if you think about it. Light workers specifically, those of you who have pretty much been this way your entire lives, like me, unfortunately, most of the time we do not come from very easy beginnings. There is usually a lot of trauma. We have gone through way more stuff in our lives than the average person has. And sometimes it's repetitive. Sometimes it's just all over the place. And I've shared a little before just by saying, if I were to write a book about my life, the editor would immediately write me a note and just say, this jumps all over the place. I can't even understand how these strings all pull together. But that's very much how my beginnings were. I mean, I did not have what you would call an easy, normal childhood. I did not have the most easy breeziest of teenage years. I worked really, really hard in my 20s to try and change my life and put myself in a situation where I could have some calm and, contain my environment for the most part so that it was happy and soothing. But like most light workers, I went through all of those things early to help mold me and help me see how spirit works. That with all of those things, that if I were to say all of them, some people would be like, oh my God, how can you, go on or exist or, put a smile on your face? It's because I see how spirit works. And there were certain things that I took things for the team, so others wouldn't have to go through them. There were other things that I needed to experience because I wouldn't have empathy and I wouldn't have compassion for others in those situations if I hadn't experienced it myself in some way, shape, or form. I wouldn't have been able to hold someone's hand and talk to them about certain things that have happened to them or that they're going through in their life if I hadn't experienced them myself. And sometimes they're generational, where, it's generation upon generation upon generation, and it gets to you and you say, nope, I'm going to be a generational ender on this. I'm not allowing this to go on. This does not go past me. I'm not passing this on to my children. I'm not allowing this to go another generation further. I am going to stop this. I am going to transmute and change this and turn this into light, even though maybe there's darkness and there's trauma and there's anger and all these things behind it. And then there's this flip of the coin where you're able to see the beauty in all that ugliness. And the beauty is who you come into being. Because things can either make or break you, right? Like, we all go through situations, and there can be 10 of us, and you could put all 10 of us in the same situation, and you're going to have 4 people who are going to absolutely break under the pressure and melt down or whatever it is. You're going to have 4 people who are going to absolutely take it, succeed, and do brilliant things from it. And then you're going to have 2 people that are kind of somewhere in the middle that probably need to go through it again harder in order to get it. And this isn't to say that light workers have it easy and they get to go through things once and then everything's hunky-dory and they get it. There have been things that I've had to go through over and over and over again in order for them to stick, because they're not my nature. My nature isn't to be rude or hostile or exclusive. My nature is an includer. My nature is kindness. My nature is to include everyone and everyone be a part of it and be happy. But I've had to learn boundaries. I've had to learn that there's some people who, no matter what boundary you put down, they are going to run all over it like they own you when they don't. And there's had to be times when, the first 18 times that I said, no, please, I'm asking you no. And then the 19th time where I'm going to totally snap and be like, hey, I told you, stop it. And there's times when you have to get downright rude and you have to call people out on stuff. And, I am a really kind and loving person, but I also am the kind of person that if that kind of behavior keeps going and going, I will be the person who calls the person out. And I try not to do it in a public spectacle. I try to do it in a more private way. But sometimes those are hard conversations where you have to call someone out on their BS and just tell them, like, hey, you know what you're doing. I know what you're doing. It's not cool. Stop it. You know better. Or just put down a firm boundary and say, if that's the choice you want to make, and I've told you 900 times before, if you make that choice, I cannot be in your life and participate. Doesn't mean I don't love you. It just means I refuse to participate if you're going to put yourself in a dumb situation that you know way better than to do. And I don't want to sit here for the umpteenth time and hold your hand through it when I've already done this and wasted so much of your and my own time before. I don't have to do that because your life choice dictates what you want to do. I can still love you, but I can also love you from afar. And that's discernment. It's not judgment. I'm not sitting there judging them for what they're doing, but I am being discerning of who I'm going to have active in my life. And there are times, and I'm sure as all of you are listening to this, you're thinking of some times in your own life where maybe you were wishing that you had put that firm boundary down and said, no, I'm not putting up with this behavior. And there's going to be other times where you're going to be so proud that you did with other situations. And I want you to take a moment right now and pat yourself on the back for the times when you did. Because I know that there are some of you out there who put some really firm boundaries down on very uncomfortable situations. And congratulate yourself because it's extremely hard to do. I've had to do it a few times in my life and it was rough because again, it's not in my nature. And for people with big hearts, normally it's not in our nature to have to cut people off. But the longer you live and the longer you're around, sometimes you see and you understand that there are people who just want to live their life a certain way, and there is nothing you can do that is going to change their mind. And that's discernment. You're not judging them. They're making their choices. That's their life. That's okay. But you don't need to participate in it. It doesn't need to affect you. And a lot of times it does. When people are making bad choices, it does affect you. Whether it's affecting you on a moral ground level, whether it's affecting you physically, whether it's, putting you or your family in harm's way, even emotional harm's way. Because there are some people who really don't want to clean up their emotional act and just want to act out of pocket 6 ways from Sunday. And I know I wouldn't want my family or kids around that. So if they choose to continue wanting to act that way, there's nothing wrong with me saying, you can act whatever way you want, just not around me and my children, or me and my family members, or, around these people, etc. So those are some of the things about light work that I feel like don't always get talked about, which are, yes, there is a lot of loving and a lot of kindness. There are a ton of times when you're holding hands and you're letting people cry on your shoulder and you're helping them work through the dark times. But there's a lot of other times too when you're dealing with some pretty nasty, ugly stuff. Just like in life in general, right? So this isn't even just about light working anymore. This is just humans in general, the stuff that we deal with. But with light workers specifically, because there is a kind heart there, because there is the desire to help, to raise up, to lift up, because that is there and it is so earnest within the person's heart who's trying to help. When someone doesn't want to take your hand and accept your help, it can be hard. It can be really, really hard. And I know there was another episode in which I talked about some of the pitfalls of doing this work. And if you haven't listened to that one and any of this is resonating with you or hitting a chord, I highly recommend that you go back and listen to that one as well, because I do delve into a little bit on that one of some of the hard parts of doing this work. And there are. It doesn't mean that it's always easy. It's very, very hard to see someone that you love and someone that all they have to do is X, Y, or Z, and their whole life can be better, and they choose not to. And that's when you have a choice of discernment. You can choose to walk away and say, I've given it my all, or you could choose to stick it in there another round and try again. Now that all being said, going back to the beginning with a lot of light workers, being that a lot of us have had a lot to overcome and a lot to deal with, this is partially the reason why we tend to be so good at talking other people through their issues and listening and really caring. And it's because usually we went through a lot of these things alone. And when you're young and you're going through really ugly, nasty stuff and you're alone and you have no one to talk to, but spirit, pray to God, You learn a self-reliance, but you also learn a deeper faith. Because I feel like for anyone out there who is alone going through something awful or something really, really hard, that's the time when spirit is right next to you. And there's a lovely poem about footprints in the sand. And I get too emotional when I talk about this, so I'm not going to quote it. But the last line of that poem is so profound. And it's so profound because it's true. I can tell you things that I went through as a child when I was very much alone. And, yes, I have the gift of sight, but there was times I knew that spirit was holding me. I knew that spirit was holding my hand through it. In white magic, there is a line that I used to say, and I did not even really understand, ever really got it from. But when I was finishing up, whether it would be a spell or an intention, I would say, harming none and helping all is how it shall be. And it wasn't until I got a wee bit older and I was reading back on some of my old spell books that I kept seeing this was on every single one. And it was also interesting to see sometimes the things that would come from different things that I was working on. In that, there were some people who maybe on the outside didn't fare so well from an incident or something that had happened. But in the end, they really did. I mean, I had this one incident in particular, which I'll give an example of. This person and I were beyond best friends. We used to say that we were soulmates. And yeah, you can have soulmates that are friends that aren't actual, relationships. And we were super duper 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 close. And we ended up going through this time. And even today, when we talk about it, it took us like 15 years of not talking. And we were so incredibly close. And we started having these fights. And they were ridiculous. Like, if I were to tell you the things that we fight, like one of them was how I put peanut butter on a piece of toast. It was that petty and stupid. And we ended up having this dramatic fight and, ended up moving out and not talking for, like I said, almost 15 years. And finally, during that time period, we weren't in each other's lives. And, both of us had tremendous growth during that time. And so after about 12 to 15 years, we would be in light contact. So like a little email here, a little email there, like, hi, how are you doing? Something like that, but nothing too big. So we ended up getting together and we sat down and we started talking one day. And we decided, okay, we're going to have this conversation. We're actually going to see each other and we're going to hash it out. And so we did. And what ended up coming out is neither of us fully really understood why we were arguing to begin with. What started it, neither of us could understand or even recall. But what we both marveled at is if we had stayed in each other's lives during that time period, if we hadn't had the big old fight and stopped talking, both of our lives would have been dramatically different. This person ended up getting back with the love of their life. They ended up getting married and having children and having this like amazing life and growth. And I ended up having all this stuff happen to me that wouldn't have happened if this person had been in my life. And it was really nice, just as friends, like that base friendship was still there after all those years, to hear about all the stuff that happened and how honestly it kind of was catalyzed by this weird argument that neither of us understood why. But that fight that we had ended up catapulting both of us in these wonderful different directions. And, now that we're at where we're at in life, we're able to talk and have absolute joy for one another at all the things that transpired while we were apart. And it's beautiful. And that's kind of how some of this work goes, that there can be things that happen and, no one wants to argue, no one wants to have fights or awful things happen, but there are times when they do. And then there are times when you kind of sit there and you're like, why did that even occur? And then you see what happens because of it. And that's where the real light work comes in. That's where the real meat and potatoes of the work is. And it sometimes isn't even directly by you. It's just by an action, or you calling something out, or you putting a foot down and standing up for yourself, and other people see that. And trust and believe, if you have other people in your life, whether you know it or not, they're watching every single thing that you do, especially if you have young ones or younger people in your life. They are watching everything you do as an example. If you have children, your children are sopping up all the choices that you're making. Whether you realize they know what you're doing or not, they're watching, and they are learning that either that behavior is okay or that behavior isn't okay. And some kids are great and are just on their own able to figure it out, but that's very far and few in between. And being a parent in any shape or form, whether it's you're a grandparent and you're taking on those babies, or you're a parent, or you're a step parent, or you're an adopted parent, or you're a foster parent, a parent in any shape or form, or you're an auntie or an uncle, all of that means something to those children. Because I could tell you, growing up, all the beautiful adults in my life, I always listened. Because I knew I was going to be an adult someday, and I better well listen to what the adults are doing, because I'm going to need to know that info. But also because these people were showing me what life was like when you got older, and I wanted to be prepared for what life was like. And although I didn't necessarily grow up and live life like they did, I did listen to the things that they were talking about, and I probably avoided some major obstacles as a result of hearing them. And it's something that I see, especially within a lot of my friends and family, that a lot of people work so hard to shelter their children. Oh, I just want them to be a kid. And that's fine. I get that. But there is something to be said about having adult conversations around your children, and having your children actually pay attention and listen, because they're going to need to understand how to deal with adults. They're going to need to understand what happens when they grow up. Otherwise, they're going to grow up and they're going to be adult children, and no one wants that in the world. There's my PSA. I'm not telling you how to parent your kids, but I am giving an example because I see that happening so much, and I'm seeing some of these young ones grow up, and they've told me that they feel lost. They feel unprepared. This is why they're begging colleges to have adulting courses, because they don't know what they're doing, because mom and dad or their parents or whatever did everything for them their entire lives. And now that they're grown up, they don't know how to do anything themselves. And I have absolutely no clue why I've gone into this very random little trajectory that I just went on. But it does have to do with light work in a way, because being a light worker, you are responsible for all of your interactions with other people. And, if you're not in the mood to go out and be around people, or if you hate your job and everyone who's going to come across you is just going to get the negative Nelly from you, are you really doing anybody a service by staying in that job? Or is it time maybe to look for a new job that makes you happy, and that you can be smiling and actually do some good and some service to the world? And you could do service to the world regardless of what you're doing. I know some amazing people who work at grocery stores and gas stations and, little utility jobs that are absolutely wonderful people. And every time I have an interaction with them, it's so special to me, because that joy comes across. That's a form of light work. If you're out, I don't know about you, but I have probably the happiest mailman in the entire universe. He sings, he's talking to all the birds outside and the squirrels. And it's so cool because, let's face it, he's on his own most of the day, right? He's just delivering mail. Most people aren't home. But every time he comes up to my house and I get to see him, it puts a smile on my face. And I don't know if he absolutely adores his job doing mail, but I think how special and absolutely awesome that is, that even when he thinks no one is watching him and no one's home, that he still has that bright smile on his face and he's still singing and talking to the animals, same way I do. But it's so wonderful. And then when I have my brief interactions with them, they're so happy and helpful. And that's a form of light work right there. So, what I mean by all of these different examples and all of these things that I've talked about is that whether you're a light worker from birth or whether you've chosen to get on this path and do this much later in life, these are all the different ways. It doesn't mean that you have to wear a hippie skirt and, put on patchouli oil and flowers in your hair. It's not about that. Your light work can come in so many different capacities. It could be from a smile when you're talking to somebody on the phone. It could be from a positive interaction when you just smile at someone in the grocery store, or if someone needs help that you offer to pick something up for them. A random stranger holding open the door for them. All those little ways that you have no clue how you're impacting someone. And I'm very blessed because during my life, I've had more than a few people actually tell me the impact that I've had. And trust me, I know that's a blessing because I know there's a lot of people out there who feel like, why am I even trying to be nice anymore? Everyone's taking it for granted. No one really cares. They do. They might not act like it at the moment, but it impacts them somewhere along the way. They're going to think back about that random stranger who held open the door for them that one day, when someone doesn't. And they're going to think about the person who smiled at them in the store, maybe when they're having a really rough day. You never know the battle that someone else is fighting. And so that's why it's so nice to be as happy and kind and sweet and empathic as you possibly can. And I know I make jokes about certain things of, making sure I just go to the store and I want to get my stuff and get in and get out. But you know what? When someone does stop me and they need to have a conversation or they need to get something off their chest or this very random interaction happens, yeah, sometimes, I make a little complaint, but for the most part, my heart is full because I know I was able to help somebody. And I have actual notes that people have written me in the past where I had, interactions with them of things that I just thought were normal. If someone's hurting, you offer them a shoulder to cry on, or you ask them if they're okay and you have a conversation. And there was this one in particular, I'm totally choking up. Why do I cry every time I'm on these? I swear to God. Okay. I don't know. There was this one in particular where the job that I was at the time, woman came in, seemed like a very normal interaction, and I'm asking her the questions. And she basically starts crying and literally gets on the floor, sobbing in my lap. Now, luckily, I had an office and, anyone who's crying like that, like this is, dramatic at best, but I care. And so I talked to her and, she was there like a good hour. And I got her set up with whatever. And, she felt much better at the end of it and went on her way. And so a couple days later, I get this cute little card and I open it up and it was from this woman who was crying on my lap a couple days before. And she wrote me a note. She said, "You have no clue what you've done. You saved my life." And I'm reading this note going, huh? Right? Like, okay. Well, what I didn't know is that she was actually on her way to undo herself. I'll say that word. And for whatever reason, when she drove by where I was, she said it was like a shining beacon. It was like the place was almost screaming at her to stop. And she thought, whatever, it's one little stop before I go and end it all. And so she stopped in and she got me. And she didn't expect to get someone like me, someone who actually would listen or care, but she did. And she said that changed her whole mind or her whole trajectory. And to this day, I still think about this woman and that interaction. And I pray that she's okay. Because I got to have, instant feedback of something that I didn't know she was that bad off. I mean, I knew she was crying and she obviously needed someone to talk to because she got on the floor sobbing in my lap. But I didn't know what she was on her way to do. I didn't know it was that bad. I mean, I had a feeling that she really needed to talk to someone, but that's just a little example of when you don't know what it is that your impact is. When you think you're just going through the motions and no one cares, I can guarantee you someone out there cares. Someone out there is smiling because you made their entire day. Someone out there is alive today because you took the time. Someone out there is getting through something that they never thought they could because you're there in their life. And as a deep thank you from the bottom of my heart, from the entire universe, thank you. Thank you for being that person, whether it's in the smallest capacity or the largest capacity, whatever it is. Thank you for doing that. And that's a way of doing the work.